Welcome along. In this explainer, we are going to get straight into the essential operations management methods that you need to know for your Cambridge AS level syllabus.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the core choice every business has to make, people versus machines. Then we'll dive deep into the 4 key production methods. And finally, and this is really important for your exams, we'll get into how a business chooses the right method and just as crucially, the challenges they face when they need to change it. All right, let's get right into it. The very first decision any operations manager has to make is about their fundamental approach to actually making things.
And it all boils down to this simple question. Are you going to rely more on people or are you going to rely more on machines? This is the first big strategic decision in operations, and honestly, it shapes pretty much everything that comes after.
Okay, so let's break down the labor-intensive route. This is where the cost of your workforce is actually higher than the cost of your equipment. Now, the big plus side is that it gives you amazing flexibility and the ability to customize. This means the work is more interesting for employees, and you can serve those really specific niche markets. But there's always a trade-off, right? The output is usually much lower, and the quality of the final product, well, it all comes down to how skilled your workers are, and those specialists often need higher wages. Now, on the flip side, you've got capital-intensive production. And what's really fascinating here is the sheer scale it allows for. Just imagine a fully automated factory churning out thousands of identical products every single hour. That consistency is key, and it lets businesses drive down their unit costs through economies of scale. The catch? The initial investment is just massive. We're talking huge fixed costs for machinery, not to mention ongoing maintenance, and there's a very real risk that your super expensive new tech could be out of date in just a few years.
So you're probably thinking, which one is better? Well, the critical point here is that there's no single right answer. It totally depends. A luxury brand creating bespoke items is going to have a completely different strategy than a company selling to the mass market. And of course, a small startup just doesn't have the same kind of cash to splash on expensive machinery that a huge corporation does.
Right, let's move on and see how these big ideas, labor versus capital, translate into actual, specific production methods. We'll start with the most customized approaches first.
First up is job production. And this is all about uniqueness. We're talking about making things one at a time, often to a customer's exact specifications. Think of a tailored suit, a custom-designed piece of jewelry, or even gigantic engineering projects like a bridge or a dam.
This example from Aston Martin just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly illustrates that sense of pride and craftsmanship. For a brand like that, job production is everything. It's central to their image of exclusivity and quality. Sure, it's slow and expensive, but think how motivating it is for those skilled engineers to see their own name on a finished engine.
Okay, but what if you need to make more than one item, but not, millions of them? Well, that's where batch production comes into play. Here, you're making a specific quantity of identical products, and that whole group, the batch, moves from one stage of the process to the next altogether.
The baker analogy is just perfect for this. A baker doesn't make one roll, then another, then another. No. They mix all the dough for the batch, then shape all the rolls, then bake them all at once. This gives you some of those cost savings from economies of scale, but you still stay flexible. A clothing factory, for example, could produce a batch of 500 blue jumpers, then just reset the machines and produce a batch of 500 red ones. The main downside here is the pileup of work-in-progress inventory. That's all the half-finished goods waiting between stages, and that ties up a lot of money.
Okay, let's shift gears now and look at the methods that are really designed for massive scale and see how technology completely changes the game. So, flow production. This is your classic assembly line, the kind you see in movies. It's built for making huge quantities of a standardized product where you know demand is going to be high and steady. And unlike batch production, the individual items just move continuously from one station to the next, no waiting around. This method is incredibly efficient because it's so capital-intensive. Your labor costs per item are super low, and the quality is really consistent. But you have to remember that trade-off. The initial cost for all that equipment is astronomical. And from a human perspective, the work can be incredibly repetitive and, well, boring. That can lead to real problems with worker motivation, absenteeism, and high staff turnover.
And that brings us to the modern hybrid, mass customization. This is all about trying to get the best of both worlds. The goal is to get those super low unit costs that you see in flow production, but combine them with the variety and customer choice you get from job or batch production. Honestly, it's a real game changer. So how do they do it? It all comes down to incredibly smart product design. The trick is to keep most of the components standard,
but allow for key parts to be easily swapped out. This lets businesses offer a ton of variety to the customer, while still keeping that efficiency and the low unit costs of mass production. Of course, it relies on some seriously advanced tech and workers who are skilled in multiple areas. So now that we've covered the 4 main methods, how on earth does a business choose the right one? And, maybe more importantly, what happens when they realize they need to change?
Okay, this table is a fantastic revision tool. You can see at a glance the main feature of each method, from single one-off items for job production, all the way to flow production with customized differences for mass customization. And what's really useful is that it lists the requirements, like needing a highly skilled workforce for job production versus that specialized, expensive capital equipment for flow.
Now listen up, because for exam purposes, you really need to pay attention here. When a question asks you to evaluate or recommend a production method, this table is basically your toolkit. It lets you directly compare the pros, like the high worker motivation in job production, against the cons, like those high levels of inventory that can build up in batch production. And this brings us to a really critical strategic question for any growing business. A company might need to switch from, say, job to batch production, or maybe even from batch to flow as their product gets more popular. But here's the thing. Changing your entire production method isn't as simple as just flipping a switch. The challenges are massive, and you can really group them into 2 main areas: finance and people. Financially, moving towards mass production means a huge investment in new machines and equipment. Plus, you'll need more working capital just to fund all that extra inventory. And then, from a human resources angle, those specialized craft skills might suddenly become redundant, which can lead to serious demotivation and resistance. The workers who do stay will need a lot of retraining to become the flexible, multi-skilled employees you need for these more advanced systems.
Okay, to finish up, let's take a step back and evaluate these methods and have a think about where operations management is actually headed.
This is such a crucial point. What it's saying is that technology is basically blurring the lines between these different methods. Flexible, computer-controlled machines are now allowing big companies to offer a level of personalization that used to be only possible for small, niche businesses doing job production. It's completely reshaping the competitive landscape. And this leaves us with a final key evaluation point for you to really think about. You know, as consumers, we want it all, don't we? We want the low prices that come from mass production, but we also want the personalized, unique products of job production. So is mass customization becoming the only real competitive strategy out there? While there's probably always going to be a place for niche luxury job production, for the mass market, being able to customize at scale might just be the key to survival and growth in the future.